I could hear the ice shift in my crystal glass, a faint crackling sound that seemed to fill the entire dining room. You will pay me $2,500 now. This is my family's property. Margaret Harwood spoke the words as if she were reading a court order she had already won. Her arms were crossed, her chin lifted, her eyes fixed on me with the cold patience of a woman who had never been told no in her adult life. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I did not give her the satisfaction of a single shaken breath. I lifted my teacup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The chamomile had gone lukewarm, but I held it on my tongue for a beat longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch into something uncomfortable for everyone except me. I studied her over the rim of the cup. The slight tremor in her left hand, the way her wedding ring caught the chandelier light as she pressed her fingers harder into her own forearm. She was nervous. She was never nervous unless she was afraid the performance might fail. I set the cup down on the polished mahogany table, aligning it precisely with the edge of the coaster. Then I smiled, soft and unhurried. Then I'll simply move back to my own place, I said. Across the table, my husband's fork froze midair, a speared green bean suspended between his mouth and his plate. Derek glanced at his mother, then at me, a flicker of unease crossing his face. But he said nothing. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. He leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for the table to hear, "Whose apartment?" I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared 3 days ago. I did not open it yet. I simply placed it on the table beside my plate, my fingertips resting on the edge, and let the question hang there like smoke in still air. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what was in that folder, before I walk you through the dinner that became the end of one life and the beginning of another, I want to ask you something. I want you to pause this recording for just a moment and think about where you are right now. Are you in your car, driving home from a long shift? Are you folding laundry in a quiet house while the children sleep? Are you sitting in a waiting room somewhere, trying not to think about why you are there? Tell me what city you are listening from. Drop it in the comments if you feel brave enough. I read every single one, and I promise you, knowing I am not alone in this room, in this memory, in this moment, makes the telling easier. My name is Alina Hart. In the months before that Sunday dinner, I was 32 years old, a senior associate at a mid-sized firm in the city, and I specialized in property law. I had graduated top of my class from a school that cost more than my parents' house, and I had spent the 9 years since building a practice that made me quietly formidable in a field most people find boring. Real estate law is not glamorous. It is not the stuff of courtroom dramas or breaking news, but it is the language of ownership. It is the architecture of power, and I had been fluent in it long before I ever set foot in law school. The family sitting around that dining table did not know any of this. To them, I was Derek's wife. I was the woman who had married into the Harwood name 3 years ago, the one who showed up to Sunday dinners in simple blouses and minimal jewelry, who helped clear the dishes without being asked, who laughed at Philip's tired jokes, and listened to Margaret's opinions about everything from curtains to foreign policy with what they mistook for deference. I wore flat shoes. I kept my hair in a low ponytail. I never corrected anyone. I never dominated a conversation. I was, by all visible measures, unremarkable. That was by design. Margaret Harwood was the architect of a family system that had been running on unspoken rules for 40 years. She was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested she had once been told good posture was a moral virtue. She dressed in neutral tones, expensive but never flashy, and she ran her household the way a plant manager runs a production floor. Every holiday was scheduled. Every opinion was delivered as a verdict. Every disagreement was met with silence so cold it functioned as a punishment. Her husband, Philip, was the enforcer of a different kind. He did not deliver demands. He did not raise his voice. He said things like, "Let's not make a scene, and can we just keep the peace for one evening?" He was the quiet one, the reasonable one, the man who stood in the background while his wife did the heavy lifting of cruelty, and then stepped in just in time to make anyone who pushed back look unreasonable. He was an enabler wrapped in a cardigan, and he was every bit as dangerous as she was. And then there was Derek. Derek was the beneficiary of the system, whether he knew it or not. He had been raised to believe that his mother's demands were simply how the world worked. He had been trained from boyhood to interpret her manipulations as concern, her control as love, and her cruelty as strength of character. He was not a bad man. I still believe that, even now, even after everything. But he was a trained one. And the training ran deeper than either of us understood when we stood at the altar and promised to build a life together. I met Derek Harwood at a charity gala I did not want to attend. I was there because my firm had bought a table, and my senior partner had asked me to represent us. I spent most of the evening standing near the bar, nursing a single glass of Sauvignon Blanc, watching the room with the quiet detachment of someone who had learned early that watching was safer than participating. Derek approached me during a lull in the auction. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way, with warm eyes and an easy smile, and he introduced himself without the performative confidence that so many men brought to those rooms. He asked what I did. I told him I was a lawyer. He asked what kind. I said real estate. He laughed and said that sounded painfully boring. I agreed with him and I meant it. But something about the way he said it, the way he leaned in just slightly closer than necessary, made me stay. We talked for an hour. He told me he worked in finance, that he came from a close family, that his mother was strong willed and his father was the calm to her storm. He described them with affection, with loyalty, with the kind of uncomplicated love that I recognized as both genuine and naive. He had never been tested. He had never had to choose. The family was a unit, and the unit was good, and anyone who said otherwise simply did not understand. I understood. I understood the moment he described his mother's need to control every holiday, every vacation, every major decision. I understood the moment he said his father always smoothed things over when there was tension. I understood the architecture of the system even before I met the people who lived in it. But I was in love, or I thought I was, or I was lonely enough to mistake comfort for connection. I'm not sure it matters now. What matters is that I married him, and I married his family, and I walked into that dining room every Sunday for 3 years, knowing exactly what I was walking into. The first Sunday dinner was a performance of welcome that felt rehearsed. Margaret greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek that landed somewhere near my ear, her hands gripping my shoulders with a firmness that felt like assessment. She complimented my dress but asked where I had bought it, the subtext being that she wanted to know whether it was expensive or cheap, whether I had taste or merely luck. I told her the name of the boutique. She nodded and said she knew the owner. She probably did. Philip shook my hand and asked about the drive. Derek's younger brother, Mark, was there with his wife, a brittle woman named Caroline who spent most of the meal correcting her children in a whisper. The children, 2 boys under the age of 7, were expected to sit quietly through a 3-course dinner that began at 6 in the evening. They made it through the salad course before the younger one knocked over a glass of water. Margaret did not yell. She simply looked at Caroline with an expression that said everything, and Caroline flushed a deep, humiliated red as she mopped the spill with her napkin. I watched all of this. I catalogued it. I stored it away in the part of my mind that I used for reading people, the part that had helped me win negotiations and close deals and navigate the silent warfare of a competitive law firm. I told myself I was being observant, that I was gathering information, that this was no different from learning the dynamics of a new client's family business. But the truth is simpler. I was looking for my place. I was trying to find the space where I could exist without being crushed. The meal ended with coffee and a dessert I had brought, a lemon tart from a bakery I loved. Margaret took one bite, set down her fork, and said, "It's a little tart for my taste." She smiled when she said it, as if she were being generous by not criticizing outright. I smiled back and said, "I'll remember that." I remembered everything. Over the next several months, I learned the rhythm of the Harwood family. Sunday dinners at 6. Major holidays at the family home, a sprawling colonial in the suburbs that Margaret referred to as the main house. Birthdays celebrated with a single phone call and a card, never a party, because parties were for children and Margaret did not approve of excess. Vacations were mandatory, booked at the same beach rental every August, and attendance was not optional. When Derek and I tried to skip one year, Margaret called me personally and said, "The family needs to be together." I hope you understand. I understood. I understood that her need was a command dressed in velvet. I started building my documentation trail in the second year of our marriage. It began with a single observation. Derek mentioned in passing that his mother had asked him to co-sign a loan for a new car. He said it casually, as if it were nothing, as if asking your adult son to guarantee a debt was a normal request between a mother and her child. I asked how much. He said it was for $32,000. I asked if she had bad credit. He said no, but her name was already on a few other loans, and she did not want to complicate her portfolio. I said nothing. I did not tell him that co-signing a loan with his mother could affect his own credit score, his ability to secure financing for our future, his financial independence. I did not tell him that the request itself was a test, a way of measuring whether he would prioritize her needs over his own. I simply nodded and said, "That's between you and your mother." But I started watching more closely. I noticed that Derek's bank statements were sometimes left open on his desk. I noticed that his mother called him every weekday at 4 in the afternoon, and that the calls always lasted at least 20 minutes. I noticed that he had a separate credit card that I had never seen, and when I asked about it, he said it was for emergencies. Whose emergencies? I asked. The family's, he said. I did not confront him. I did not demand explanations. I simply opened a digital folder on my personal laptop, password protected, and began saving screenshots. I saved the co-signing agreement he mentioned. I saved the dates of his mother's calls. I saved a text message exchange I saw over his shoulder one evening, in which Margaret asked him whether we were saving for a house, and he replied that we were looking at options. She wrote back, "Don't rush into anything. You can stay here as long as you need." We were not staying with her. We had our own apartment, a two-bedroom rental in a neighborhood I had chosen because it was close to my office and far from her. But the subtext was clear. She did not want us to buy. She wanted us to remain dependent, tethered, reachable. I began attending Sunday dinners with a new purpose. I sat at the table and watched the family operate like a machine whose parts I had finally learned to identify. Margaret at the head, steering every conversation. Philip beside her, smoothing the rough edges. Derek across from me, compliant and oblivious. Mark and Caroline, tense and exhausted, their children acting as both hostages and shields. And me, the quiet daughter-in-law who smiled, helped clear the dishes, and never made a scene. I kept my wardrobe intentionally understated. Simple blouses in cream and navy and soft gray. Minimal jewelry. Small gold stud earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Flat shoes that did not click on the hardwood floors when I walked. I did not want to be memorable. I did not want to be the subject of speculation. I wanted to be the furniture that no one noticed until it was gone. There was one person in my life who knew the truth. Claire Bennett was my oldest friend, a woman I had met during my first year of law school when we were assigned as study partners and discovered that we both preferred silence to small talk. She was a forensic accountant, brilliant and understated, with the kind of mathematical mind that saw patterns where other people saw chaos. She had her own practice now, small but respected, and she had been the one to help me set up the financial structures that kept my assets separate from Derek's. The family knew Claire as my college friend, the one who showed up to our wedding in a simple dress and left early. They did not know that she had reviewed our prenuptial agreement before I signed it. They did not know that she had helped me structure the purchase of my apartment in a way that kept it entirely in my name. They did not know that she was the person I called after every Sunday dinner, the one who listened to my quiet recitations of the evening's microaggressions and never once told me to leave him. She was my anchor. She was the voice that said, "You are not crazy. You are not imagining this. You are the most competent person in that room, and I will be here when you need me to prove it." The apartment was purchased in the third year of our marriage. I had been saving for years, quietly, methodically, using accounts that Derek did not know about. It was not deceit. It was prudence. Every financial advisor will tell you that married couples should maintain some degree of financial independence. Every woman who has ever watched her mother struggle to leave a bad marriage will tell you that independence is not betrayal, it is survival. I found the property through a colleague at the firm. A one-bedroom in a pre-war building, south-facing, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that had been renovated just enough to feel modern without losing its soul. I walked through it on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I knew, the moment I stepped into the living room and saw the light slanting through the windows, that this was mine. I paid in cash. Not the full price, no, but a down payment large enough that my mortgage was manageable. $2,500 a month. I remember the exact number because I wrote the check myself, from an account that had my name only, and I felt something I had not felt in years, the quiet satisfaction of owning something that no one could take from me. I told Derek about the apartment 6 months after I bought it. I framed it as an investment, a rental property that would generate passive income, a smart financial move for our future. He nodded and said it sounded like a good idea. He did not ask for details. He did not ask to see the paperwork. He did not ask why I had not told him sooner. That was the moment I knew, really knew, that our marriage was built on a foundation of willful ignorance. He did not want to know. He did not want to see. Ignorance allowed him to remain loyal to his mother without confronting the conflict between her interests and mine. Ignorance was his escape hatch, and he used it every single day. I did not confront him. I did not demand that he choose. I simply added his name to a separate mental folder, the one marked requires documentation, and continued gathering evidence. The three forensic objects that would eventually unravel everything were planted in those years, scattered across my life like seeds I knew would one day germinate. The first was the deed to the apartment. I kept it in a safety deposit box at a bank my husband had never visited. It was recorded with the county clerk, showing me as the sole grantee. No joint ownership. No trust that included the Harwood name, just mine. The second was a text message thread that would later become admissible evidence in a legal proceeding I never wanted but was prepared to initiate. It began with a single message from Margaret to Derek, sent during a Sunday dinner while I was in the bathroom. I did not see it at the time. But a few weeks later, when Derek left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while he showered, I saw it. Have you talked to her about the apartment yet? He had replied, not yet. She still thinks it's an investment. She wrote back, it is an investment, a family investment. I want you to ask her for the deed. Tell her it needs to be in the family name for tax purposes. He replied, I'll bring it up this week. He never did, he never brought it up, but the thread existed and I had screenshots and I knew. The third object was the mortgage statement. I kept the first one I ever received, dated the month after I closed on the property. The monthly payment was $2,500. Exactly. I remembered the number because it was the precise sum Margaret would later demand from me at that Sunday dinner, the precise sum she thought she could extract as rent, the precise sum that I would eventually reveal as my own monthly obligation. That was the mirror value. That was the detail that would undo her. I saved every document in a folder marked only with a single initial, and I stored them in Claire's office for safekeeping. By the time the first fracture appeared in our marriage, I was not reacting. I was waiting. The fracture came on a Thursday evening in late November, 8 months before the dinner that changed everything. I had come home early from work because I had a headache that would not quit, the kind that pressed against my temples like a vice. Derek was not home yet, which was unusual. He usually beat me by at least an hour. I made tea, took 2 aspirin, and sat down at my desk to review a contract that was due the next morning. That was when I heard it. Derek's home office was adjacent to the living room, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear a phone conversation if the speaker was loud enough. I had never deliberately eavesdropped. I had never needed to. But that evening, as I sat at my desk with my tea cooling beside me, I heard Derek's voice through the wall, and I heard the voice on the other end. It was Margaret. No, I do not think she has any idea, Derek was saying. His voice was low, almost apologetic. She thinks it's just an investment property. She does not know I know about the deed. My hand stopped moving. I set down my pen. Then you need to get it transferred before she figures it out, Margaret said. Her voice was sharp, metallic. I already talked to a lawyer. If we can prove she bought it with marital funds, we can argue it's community property. But it would be cleaner if she just signed it over willingly. I know, Derek said. I'm working on it. Work faster. I want her out of that apartment and into something we control. She is too independent. It is not good for the family. I sat in my chair for a long time after the call ended. I did not cry. I did not shake. I looked at the wall between us and felt something settle in my chest, something cold and precise and final. I had known. On some level, I had always known. But hearing it, hearing the casual way they discussed my assets as if they were already theirs, hearing my husband agree to a plan that would strip me of my ownership, my security, my future, that was different. I did not confront him. I did not mention the call. I finished my contract, went to bed, and woke up the next morning with a clarity I had not felt in years. The next day, I called Claire. I need to see Vivian Torres, I said. Vivian Torres was a real estate attorney with a reputation for being quiet, efficient, and completely ruthless when necessary. She had offices in the financial district, a small suite with a view of the river, and a receptionist who never smiled. I had met her once, years ago, at a conference. She was the kind of woman who wore tailored suits and spoke in complete sentences, who never raised her voice because she never needed to. I had saved her card for exactly this moment. I met with her on a Monday morning. The office smelled like coffee and old paper, and the light coming through the windows was gray and cold. Vivian sat across from me, her hands folded on the desk, and listened without interruption as I told her everything. I told her about the apartment. I told her about the mortgage, the deed, the account I had used. I told her about the text messages I had saved and the phone call I had overheard. I told her about Margaret and Derek and the plan to strip my ownership under the guise of family unity. Vivian listened. She did not gasp. She did not offer sympathy. She simply nodded, asked a few clarifying questions, and then opened a drawer and pulled out a form. The first thing we do, she said, is formalize your ownership in a way that cannot be challenged. We create a trust. You will be the sole trustee. We transfer the deed into the trust. That protects the asset from any claim that it is marital property. How long does that take? I can have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. Once it is recorded, the only way anyone can challenge it is by proving fraud, and you have done nothing fraudulent. I nodded. The second thing we do, she continued, is prepare a letter, a formal notice of sole ownership. It will state in clear legal language that the apartment is yours, that it was purchased with your separate funds, and that any claim to the contrary is without merit. When do I send it? You do not send it until you need it, but it exists. And when the moment comes, you will have it. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. I did not tell Derek about the meeting. I did not tell him about the trust. I kept my life segmented, my information compartmentalized, my plans invisible, and I continued attending Sunday dinners. I sat at that table week after week, watching Margaret orchestrate conversations, watching Philip smooth the edges, watching Derek avoid my eyes. I smiled. I helped clear the dishes. I complimented the roast. I never once let them see what was growing inside me, the slow accumulation of evidence and strategy and resolve. By the time that Sunday dinner arrived, the one where Margaret would finally make her demand out loud, I had been preparing for it for nearly 2 years. I had the deed. I had the text messages. I had the trust. I had Vivian's letter. And I had the $2,500 number, the mirror value that would turn her demand into a confession. I did not know, as I walked into the Harwood dining room that evening, exactly how it would unfold. I did not know that Margaret would deliver her ultimatum with such confidence, or that Derek would whisper his question with such confusion, or that Philip would try to clean up the mess with his familiar refrain. But I knew what I carried in my bag, and I knew that when the moment came, I would be ready. Let me tell you what happened that night. The car engine clicked as it cooled in the Harwood driveway, a sound that had become as familiar as the knot tightening in my chest every Sunday at 5:15. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, my hands resting on the leather in the 10 and 2 position, watching the lights from the main house spill across the manicured lawn. The colonial stood 3 stories tall, brick and white trim, with black shutters that Margaret had replaced 2 years ago because the previous ones were, in her words, déclassés. A wreath of dried eucalyptus hung on the front door, even though it was only November, because Margaret believed seasonal decor should anticipate the holiday by at least 3 weeks. I looked down at my outfit. A cream silk blouse, simple and well tailored, tucked into navy trousers. Small gold stud earrings that had belonged to my grandmother Rose, the woman who had taught me that money was not something you talked about but something you held close, like a hand inside a coat pocket. She had given me those earrings on my 16th birthday, along with a piece of advice I had never forgotten. Property is power, but never let them see your hand until it is time to collect. I had worn those earrings to every Sunday dinner for the past 3 years. They were my totem, my quiet reminder that I was playing a longer game than anyone at that table could imagine. In my bag, a simple leather tote the color of caramel, I carried the folder. Inside it were 3 items: the deed to the apartment, recorded with the county clerk and showing me as the sole grantee, a printed copy of the text message thread between Margaret and Derek, time-stamped and saved as a PDF, and my most recent mortgage statement, which listed a monthly payment of $2,500 exactly. Beside the folder, nestled in a small interior pocket, was the vintage key my grandmother had given me the day she died, a silver skeleton key that had once opened the front door of her childhood home. It was not a key to anything I currently owned. It was a key to memory, to lineage, to the knowledge that I came from a line of women who had survived by staying quiet and staying ready. I took a breath. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I walked up the flagstone path, past the dormant hydrangeas, and pressed the doorbell. I heard the chime echo inside, a deep resonant tone that Margaret had chosen because she said it sounded dignified. Philip opened the door. He was wearing a navy blazer over a white button-down, his gray hair combed back, his face arranged in the expression of mild welcome that he used for guests and family alike. "Elena," he said, and he stepped aside to let me in. "Glad you made it. Traffic?" "Fine," I said. I handed him the bottle of wine I had brought, a Cabernet from a vineyard I knew he liked. "I hope this works with dinner." He glanced at the label and nodded. "I'm sure it will." "Margaret's doing a beef tenderloin. Come in, come in." I stepped into the foyer. The house was warm, overheated in the way that older homes with radiators always were, and the air carried the smell of roasting meat and the faint floral notes of the arrangement on the entry table. White roses and eucalyptus, arranged in a crystal vase that had been in Margaret's family for 3 generations. She had told me that story the first time I visited. She had not told me since because she assumed I had retained it, and she was correct. I walked into the living room, where the family was already gathered. Derek was standing by the fireplace, a glass of something amber in his hand, talking to Mark. Caroline was on the sofa, her 2 boys wedged on either side of her, both of them fidgeting with the buttons on their dress shirts. The younger one, Ethan, had a smudge of something on his collar that Caroline was trying to wipe away with a damp napkin, her movements quick and irritated. Margaret was not in the room. That was unusual. She was always the first to greet guests, the one who orchestrated the initial moments of every gathering. Her absence felt deliberate, a power move I had seen her use before. She would enter late after everyone had settled, and her arrival would reset the room's energy in her favor. I crossed to Derek and kissed his cheek. He smelled like his usual cologne, sandalwood, and something metallic, and he returned the kiss with a distracted absent-mindedness that had become our standard greeting. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he said. He did not look at me. His eyes were fixed on something across the room, a spot on the wall above the mantel where a painting of a hunting scene hung. I knew that look. It was the look he wore when he was preparing himself for something unpleasant. I did not ask what was wrong, I already knew. Dinner was announced at exactly 6 o'clock, when a small brass bell rang from the dining room. Margaret had purchased the bell on a trip to Italy and used it only for formal dinners. It was her way of signaling that the evening was under her control, that we were not guests but participants in a ritual she had designed. We filed into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, white with gold trim, and the crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Each place setting had 3 forks, 2 knives, 2 spoons, and a bread plate arranged with geometric precision. Margaret's attention to detail was not about hospitality. It was about control. Every object in its correct position, every piece of silver angled the same way, every napkin folded into a perfect rectangle. Margaret entered from the kitchen, carrying a gravy boat in both hands. She was wearing a deep burgundy silk blouse with a gold necklace that sat just above her collarbone, and her hair was pinned up in a twist that exposed the sharp line of her jaw. She looked regal, imperious, like a woman who had never once in her life doubted that she belonged at the head of any table. She set the gravy boat on a trivet and took her seat at the head of the table. Philip sat at the opposite end. Derek and I sat on the left side, Mark and Caroline on the right, with the boys squeezed between them in high-backed chairs that made their feet dangle above the floor. Margaret lifted her wineglass. To family, she said, we lifted our glasses. To family. The first course was a butternut squash soup, served in shallow bowls with a swirl of cream on top. I ate slowly, watching the room. Caroline was cutting Ethan's soup into smaller spoonfuls, her jaw tight. Mark was scrolling through his phone under the table, a behavior Margaret would have corrected if she had noticed. Philip was making small talk about a business trip to Chicago he had taken last week. Derek was silent. The main course came, beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction. Margaret carved the meat herself, standing at the sideboard with a long knife, slicing each portion with surgical precision. She served Philip first, then Derek, then Mark, then Caroline, then me. The order was deliberate. I was last. I was always last. As she placed my plate in front of me, she leaned in slightly and said, I hope it's cooked to your liking, Alina. I know you prefer things rare. There was a note in her voice, a thin veneer of politeness over something sharper. I thanked her and picked up my fork. The conversation drifted. Mark talked about a new project at work. Caroline mentioned that Ethan had gotten in trouble at school for drawing on a classmate's homework. Margaret listened to each contribution with the same neutral expression, offering a comment here and there, steering the conversation when it threatened to stray too far from her control. Then, as the plates were being cleared for the dessert course, Margaret set down her napkin and folded her hands on the table. Alina, she said, I want to discuss the apartment. The room went still. Derek's fork clinked against his plate. Mark looked up from his phone. Caroline's hand paused mid-reach for her water glass. I looked at Margaret. I kept my face neutral, my breathing even. What about it? She smiled, a thin, practiced expression that did not reach her eyes. I have been thinking about this for some time, that apartment you bought, the one in the Pruwar building on the south side. Yes, it belongs to this family now. You are married to my son, and what you bring into this marriage belongs to the family, and the family needs to be protected. She paused, letting the words settle. I said nothing. I have decided that you will pay rent, she said. $2,500 a month. That is fair market value for the unit. I have already had it appraised. I did not speak, I did not move. I looked at her and saw the slight twitch in her left eyelid, the tiny tell that betrayed her confidence. She was not sure of herself, she was bluffing, she was testing. You will pay me $2,500 now, she said, her voice hardening. This is my family's property. I let the silence stretch. I counted to 5 in my head slowly, watching her eyelid twitch again. Then I reached for my water glass, lifted it to my lips, and took a sip. The water was cool, clean, tasteless. I set the glass down and aligned it with the edge of my bread plate. Then I'll simply move back to my own place, I said. I kept my voice light, almost pleasant. Derek leaned toward me. He smelled like wine and anxiety. Whose apartment? He whispered. I turned to him. I looked at his face, the slight furrow between his brows, the way his mouth was set in a nervous half-smile. He knew. He had to know. But he was playing his part, the confused husband who had no idea what his wife owned. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather folder. I set it on the table beside my plate, my fingertips resting on the edge, and I let the question hang. My apartment, I said. Margaret's eyes flicked to the folder. What is that? I did not answer. I opened the folder. I pulled out the deed, the recorded document with the county clerk's stamp and my name in elegant black type. I slid it across the table toward her. This is the deed, I said. Recorded 3 years ago, 3 months after I closed on the property. It shows me as the sole grantee. There is no trust, no joint ownership, no family claim. It is mine. Margaret did not pick up the deed. She stared at it as if it were a snake that might strike. That cannot be right, she said. Derek told me you purchased it after the wedding. Marital assets are community property. I pulled out the second document, a notarized statement from my attorney, Vivian Torres, detailing the funding sources for the purchase. I used a separate account, I said, funded entirely by income I earned before the marriage, plus an inheritance from my grandmother. The mortgage is in my name only. I have never commingled funds. Under state law, this is not community property. It is mine. I placed the mortgage statement on top of the deed. I pointed to the number at the bottom. The monthly payment is $2,500, the exact amount you want to charge me in rent. I have been paying that mortgage from my own account for 3 years. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Margaret's face did not go pale. I will not use that cliché. What happened was subtler. The color drained from her cheeks in patches, starting at the corners of her mouth and spreading outward, leaving her skin waxy and mottled. Her hand, the one resting on the table, curled into a fist so tight that her knuckles whitened. Philip cleared his throat. "Let's not make a scene," he said. His voice was thin, reedy. "This can be discussed privately." "This is the privacy of a family dinner," I said. I thought that was the appropriate place for a family discussion. Derek was staring at the documents as if they had materialized from thin air. "You never told me," he said. His voice was flat, hollow. "You never asked," I said. "And when you did, I told you it was an investment. You accepted that without further questions." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "But the text messages, you saw them?" "I saw them," I said. "I have them saved. I have the screenshots. I have the phone call I overheard, the one where you and your mother discussed how to transfer the deed before I figured out what was happening." Margaret stood up. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a wounded animal. "This family has given you everything," she said. Her voice was shaking now, the composure cracking at the edges. "We welcomed you, we accepted you, and this is how you repay us, with legal threats and hidden documents?" "I have made no threats," I said. I stood up as well, slowly, deliberately. "I have presented documentation. You demanded $2,500 in rent for a property I own. I am clarifying the facts. That is not a threat, that is a correction." I gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. I closed it, tucked it under my arm, and picked up my bag. "I think I will be leaving now," I said. "Thank you for dinner. The tenderloin was excellent." I walked out of the dining room. I walked through the foyer, past the arrangement of white roses, past the mirror where I caught a glimpse of my own face, calm and composed. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold night air. I did not look back, and they thought that was the ending. They thought I had played my hand, shown my cards, and walked away in a moment of righteous fury. They thought the drama of that dinner would be the climax, the story they would tell each other for years, the night Alina finally showed her true colors. They had no idea. I got into my car. I started the engine. I pulled out of the driveway and drove 3 blocks before I pulled over to the side of the road and took out my phone. I called Claire. "Hello." Her voice was alert, not sleepy. She had been waiting for this call. "It happened," I said. "She made the demand. I showed the documents. I walked out." "Good," Claire said. "Now come to my office. Vivian is here." I drove to Claire's office, a small converted brownstone in a neighborhood that was quiet at this hour. The lights were on in the second-floor window. I parked, walked up the stairs, and let myself in with the code Claire had given me years ago. Vivian Torres was sitting at Claire's desk, her hands folded over a manila folder. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and a white blouse, and her hair was pulled back in a low bun. She looked exactly as she had the day I met her, composed, patient, utterly in control. Claire was standing by the window, her arms crossed. She was shorter than Vivian, with a round face and brown hair that she wore in a no-nonsense bob. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Sit down," Vivian said. I sat. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the deed transfer, and a formal letter of sole ownership, already drafted on letterhead. "I have filed the trust," Vivian said. "It is recorded. The apartment is now held in a trust for which you are the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. No one can challenge it. I have also sent a preliminary notice to the county clerk, establishing a public record of your sole ownership before the marriage. That protects against any claim of commingled assets." "Does Derek know?" I asked. "No, and he will not know until you decide to tell him, but I would recommend you file for separation quickly. Now that you have shown your hand, the family will retaliate. They will try to pressure you, manipulate you, possibly even sue you. We need to move first." She slid a second document across the desk. It was a petition for legal separation, already filled out with my information. "Sign this," Vivian said. "I will file it tomorrow morning. It will freeze any joint assets and establish a clear legal boundary. It will also trigger a response from Derek's attorney if he retains one, which will allow us to present the documentation in a formal setting. I picked up the pen, I signed my name, I dated it. Good, Vivian said. She took the document and placed it in her folder. Now, about the text messages. Claire, you have the screenshots? I have them, Claire said. I have the original metadata, the timestamps, the phone numbers, everything is preserved. Excellent, we will use those if they try to argue that Derek was not complicit, but I suspect they will not want this to go to court. The evidence is too clear, they have no standing. I sat back in the chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. I had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. I had built a case, assembled evidence, fortified my legal position. But I had not prepared for the feeling of emptiness that followed the execution. This will get worse before it gets better, Vivian said. You will lose your husband, you may lose his family entirely, but you will keep your apartment, you will keep your peace, and you will keep your dignity. I nodded. I did not trust myself to speak. Claire came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, she said. Now go home, get some sleep. Tomorrow we start the next phase. I drove home in a daze. The city lights blurred past the windows, streaks of gold and white against the dark. I parked in the garage, took the elevator up to the apartment, and unlocked the door. The apartment was dark. Derek was not there. He had not come home. He was probably still at his mother's house, sitting in the kitchen or the den, processing what had happened or planning the next move. I did not care. I locked the door behind me, set my bag on the table, and walked to the window. From the 23rd floor, I could see the city spread out below me, a grid of lights and shadows. I thought about the Harwood dining room. I thought about Margaret's face when I pulled out the deed, the way her confidence had crumbled into something raw and desperate. I thought about Derek's whisper, the confusion he had tried to project, the betrayal he had tried to hide. I thought about the text messages, saved and preserved, proof that the conspiracy had been real. And I thought about the family, gathered around that table after I left, dissecting what had happened, spinning the story to make themselves the victims. They were probably doing it right now. Philip saying, let's not make a scene to no one. Margaret saying, sweetie, you don't understand how the world works, as if I were the one who had failed to understand. They thought they had won the argument, at least. They thought they had driven me out, that my departure was a surrender. They were wrong. I watched the lights of the city flicker and thought about what my grandmother Rose had said to me on her deathbed, her hand curled around mine. Elena, she had whispered, never let them know how much you have until they try to take it from you. And when they do, make sure the price is higher than they are willing to pay. I placed my hand on the window glass. The surface was cool against my palm. They had tried to take what was mine, and now they would learn the cost. I slept deeply that night, the sleep of someone who has finally stopped carrying a secret. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of text messages from numbers I did not recognize. Philip, Mark, Caroline, even Margaret, who sent a single line, "We need to talk, this can be fixed." I did not respond. I showered, dressed in a simple gray suit, and went to Vivian's office for the filing. As I stood in the elevator, my phone buzzed again, a text from Derek. Elena, I know you are angry. But we need to talk about this. My mother is devastated. You humiliated her in front of the family. You need to apologize. I stared at the message for a long time, the audacity of it, the complete absence of self-awareness. I did not reply. I walked into Vivian's office at 9 in the morning, signed the final documents, and watched her seal them in an envelope that would be hand-delivered to Margaret Harwood's residence by a process server before noon. The family had gathered that night to celebrate what they thought was a victory. They did not know that the celebration was the last moment of peace they would know. 3 days after the dinner, I sat in Vivian Torres' office for the second time that week, and the air in the room was different. It was heavier, charged with something that felt like the quiet before a thunderstorm. The morning light slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished surface of her desk, and the smell of coffee and old paper was sharp in my nostrils. Vivian was not alone. Seated beside her, a slim tablet open on the table, was Claire. They had been meeting without me. I could see it in the way they exchanged glances, the way Claire's jaw was set, the way Vivian's hands were folded with a care that suggested she was handling something fragile and dangerous. I have found something, Vivian said. Something that goes beyond the text messages and the phone call. She slid a document across the desk. It was a bank statement, but not from any account I recognized. The header showed a regional bank I had never used, and the account number was unfamiliar. I scanned the page and my stomach tight. What is this? A home equity line of credit application, Vivian said. Submitted to this bank 5 weeks ago, it lists the apartment as collateral. The applicant listed is you, Elena Hart. The signature is yours. I looked closer. The signature was close. The loops were similar, the slant nearly identical, but it was not mine. I knew my own handwriting the way I knew my own face, and this was a forgery, clean but not perfect. I did not sign this, I said. I know, Vivian said. I had a handwriting analyst review it this morning. The pressure points are wrong. The spacing on the letters is off by a fraction. It is a forgery, but a skilled one. If you had not caught it, the loan would have been approved within the next 2 weeks. Who submitted it? The application was filed online from an IP address registered to the Harwood family home. The supporting documents, including a forged deed of trust, were delivered to the bank by a courier service. I have the tracking number. She placed a second document on the desk. A courier receipt, dated the same week as the application. The sender's address was Margaret Harwood's home. The recipient was the bank's loan processing center. I felt something cold settle in my chest. It was not anger, it was clarity. They were planning to take out a loan against my property, I said, using my name without my knowledge. $120,000, Vivian said. The loan amount was for $120,000. The application listed the purpose as home improvements. If it had been approved, the money would have been deposited into an account that also bears a forged signature. I have that account number as well. She slid a third document across the desk. Another bank statement, this one showing a recently opened checking account in my name. The opening deposit was $1,000, cash. The account had been dormant since then, waiting for the loan proceeds. Who opened this account? A woman matching Margaret Harwood's description visited the branch in person, presented a forged driver's license with your name and her photograph, and opened the account. I have obtained the security footage from the bank. The timestamp matches. I looked at the freeze frame on Claire's tablet. There was Margaret standing at a teller window, wearing a wig I had never seen, a false smile on her face. She looked like a stranger and exactly like herself at the same time. Claire spoke for the first time. I traced the account application back through the bank's digital records. The email address used for the online portion is a burner account created 3 days before the application, but the IP address for that account also resolves to the Harwood home. She used her own internet connection, I said. Bold, Claire said. Arrogant, she assumed no one would look. I leaned back in my chair. The evidence was damning: identity theft, forgery, attempted fraud. These were not family squabbles. These were crimes with statutory penalties. Prison time. What are my options? I asked. Vivian folded her hands. You have several. You can report this to the district attorney's office. The evidence is strong enough to warrant an investigation. You can also file a civil suit for fraud and conversion, or you can use this as leverage in a private settlement. What would a private settlement look like? Full cessation of all claims against the property. A written acknowledgement of your sole ownership, possibly a financial penalty, but more importantly, it would avoid a public trial if that matters to you. I looked down at the documents: the forged signature, the courier receipt, the bank account, the security footage, Margaret's face distorted by the wig and the lies. What about Derek? I asked. Was he involved? Vivian and Claire exchanged another glance. We have not found direct evidence of his involvement in the loan fraud, Vivian said. But he was aware of the plan to claim the apartment. The text messages prove that. And he did not stop his mother. He did not warn you. The silence stretched for a long moment. He would not have stopped her, I said. He never does. I picked up the documents and placed them in my bag, next to the leather folder that already held the deed and the mortgage statement and the text message screenshots. The weight of it was physical now, a tangible pressure against my shoulder. Do you want to do Alina? Claire asked. I thought about my grandmother Rose. I thought about what she had said to me that final afternoon in the hospital, her hand cool and dry in mine. Property is power, but never let them see your hand until it is time to collect. I had shown my hand at the dinner. I had revealed the deed, the ownership, the truth. But that was only the first layer. The family thought that was the extent of my arsenal. They thought I had played my best card and walked away. They did not know about this. They did not know that I now held proof of a crime. I want to wait, I said. I want them to keep digging. I want them to believe they have one. And when they are most confident, when they are certain I have nothing left, I will show them this. Vivian nodded. That is a strategic choice. It carries risk. They may escalate. Let them escalate, I said. Every step they take will be documented. Every message, every call, every attempt to pressure me. I will build a file so complete that when I finally act, there will be no room for doubt. I left the office with a new mission. The folder in my bag was heavier now, but so was my resolve. The days that followed were a study in silence. I did not respond to the texts. I did not answer the calls. I let my phone ring and ring, watching Margaret's name flash on the screen, then Philip's, then Derek's. I watched the voicemail notifications accumulate, each one a timestamp that I logged in a spreadsheet Claire had set up for me. The messages themselves were a masterclass in narcissistic escalation. The first round was conciliatory, Derek's voice soft and pleading. Alina, please, let's talk about this. I know you are upset. We just want to work things out. The second round was defensive, Margaret's voice sharp and clipped. Alina, you need to understand that you embarrassed yourself. No one was trying to take anything from you. We were trying to bring you into the family properly. The third round was angry, Philip's voice thin with irritation. Alina, this is getting ridiculous. You cannot ignore us forever. We are family. We need to sit down and resolve this. The fourth round was threatening. A text from Derek, his words stiff and formal. My mother has consulted an attorney. If you do not respond within 48 hours, we will pursue legal action to establish the family's interest in the property. I saved everyone. I took screenshots, recorded the voicemails, exported the call logs. I organized them in folders by date and sender, each one labeled with a color code Claire had designed. Green for neutral, yellow for defensive, red for threatening. The spreadsheet grew. By the end of the first week, I had 43 entries. By the end of the second week, 70. The family was escalating, and I was letting them. I began to respond, but only in ways that reinforced their belief that I was crumbling. I sent a single text to Derek on the evening of the fifth day. I need time to think. This has been hard for me too. He replied within seconds. I know, I understand. Take the time you need. We will be here when you are ready. I did not reply. The next day, I called my mother-in-law's house line and left a message on Philip's voicemail. I made my voice sound tired, fragile. I appreciate you reaching out. I just need a little space. I will call when I am ready to talk. I hung up and felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt, but I pushed it down. This was not cruelty. This was defense. They had lied. They had forged my name. They had planned to steal my home. And they were still pretending they had done nothing wrong. If you have ever been told to apologize for protecting what is yours, I want you to pause this recording for just a moment. Think about that feeling. The pressure to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to sacrifice your boundaries for the comfort of people who never asked what you needed. If you have ever been told that standing up for yourself was an act of aggression, leave a comment and tell me. I need to know I am not the only one who has felt this. I continued the charade for another week. I sent Derek a text saying I missed him. I sent Margaret a short email thanking her for a recipe she had shared months ago. I let them believe I was softening, that the fight had gone out of me, that I was coming around to their version of events. The family responded exactly as I expected. They became more confident, more demanding, more arrogant. Philip called on a Tuesday evening. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was warm, paternal, almost smug. Elena, I am glad you are coming around. We know this has been hard, but we really need to sit down and finalize the arrangements for the apartment. Margaret has some paperwork she wants you to sign. Nothing complicated. Just formalities. I saved the voicemail. Mark sent me a text the next day. Hey, Alina, Mom says you are feeling better. That is good. Listen, I know things got heated at dinner, but we all want to move past it. Can we meet for coffee this weekend? I saved the text. Caroline sent a message through Derek's phone, a group text to Mark and Caroline and Margaret that was clearly meant to be private but was accidentally sent to me instead. She is finally seeing reason. Took her long enough. I thought we would have to sue. I saved that one too. I took a screenshot and filed it under read. The arrogance was staggering. They had no idea what I had. They had no idea that Vivian had already filed the trust, that the apartment was legally unassailable, that I had proof of their criminal attempt to steal my identity and my property. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They thought I was coming back to the table to surrender. I let them believe it. Claire came over on a Saturday afternoon. She brought her laptop, a portable printer, and a stack of manila envelopes. We sat at my dining table, the one I had bought from a vintage store, and we prepared the evidence binder. This is the master copy, Claire said, sliding a thick binder across the table. The cover was labeled simply, Alina Hart v. Estate Claims. Inside were tabs. Tab A, the deed. Tab B, the trust documents. Tab C, the mortgage statements, all 24 of them, each one showing the $2,500 payment from my separate account. Tab D, the text message thread printed on high-quality paper with the metadata visible in the margins. Tab E, the voicemail transcripts typed and annotated with timestamps. Tab F, the bank application, the forged signatures, the handwriting analysis. Tab G, the courier receipt. Tab H, the security footage stills. It was comprehensive. It was devastating. It was the kind of evidence that made a legal case almost certain to succeed. Claire handed me a second binder. This is the copy for your attorney. She will keep it in her office. Never leave this one unattended. I took it. The weight was significant. I set it on the table beside my grandmother's key, which I had placed there earlier as a touchstone. Now, Claire said, we need to talk about the meeting. What meeting? The one you are going to have with the family. They have been pushing for it. If you keep delaying, they will get suspicious. You need to agree to a date and location, and you need to do it in a way that makes them think you are giving in. I thought about it. I will tell Derek I am ready to talk. I will suggest a Sunday dinner. Same venue, same table. Claire raised an eyebrow. You want to go back to the scene of the crime? I want them to feel safe. I want them to think they have won. I want them seated around that table, comfortable and confident when I walk in with this. I touched the binder. Claire nodded. That is cold, Alina. It is necessary. I sent the text to Derek the next morning. I have been thinking, I want to come to dinner on Sunday. I think we should talk. His reply came within a minute. That is great. Everyone will be so happy. What time? The usual? 6. I will be there. I spent the rest of the week in a state of controlled preparation. I rehearsed the walk to the dining room, the opening of the binder, the presentation of each piece of evidence. I rehearsed the words I would say, the tone I would use. I rehearsed not letting my voice crack, not letting my hands shake. Vivian called on Friday to confirm the final details. The trust is recorded, the deed is secure. I have sent a preliminary notice to the county clerk, just to be safe. If they try to file any competing claim, it will be rejected automatically. Good. The district attorney's office has been notified informally. They have accepted a sealed envelope with copies of the forgery evidence. If you decide to press charges, the investigation can begin within days. I thanked her and hung up. On Saturday night, I sat alone in my apartment, the binder open on the coffee table in front of me. The lights were low. The city hummed outside the windows. My grandmother's key was in my hand, the metal warm from my skin. I thought about the dinner ahead. I thought about Margaret's face when she saw the binder. I thought about Derek's silence, the way he would sit and watch and say nothing. I thought about the moment when I would stand up, close the binder, and walk out. They were not ready for what was coming. They were still celebrating their imagined victory, planning their next move, congratulating each other on how well they had handled the difficult daughter-in-law. They had no idea that the next time I walked through that door, the dinner would be the last one they ever hosted with me at the table. I parked my car on the street in front of the Harwood house at exactly 5:57 on Sunday evening. I sat for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the warm light spill from the windows of the Colonial. The wreath of dried eucalyptus was still on the front door, slightly more faded now, the edges curling inward. I could see movement through the living room window, silhouettes crossing the golden glow, the family gathering as they had every Sunday for decades. In the passenger seat, the leather folder sat closed. Inside it, the binder Claire and I had prepared, the deed, the text messages, the mortgage statements, the forgery evidence, the courier receipt, the security footage stills, the voicemail transcripts, the complete record of a family's attempt to steal what was mine. I picked up the folder. I stepped out of the car. The air was cold and dry, and the gravel crunched under my flat-soled shoes as I walked to the front door. I did not ring the bell. I opened the door myself and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary. The table in the dining room was already set, the good china in place, the crystal glasses catching the light. I could hear voices from the kitchen, Margaret's sharp instructions, Philip's low murmurs, the clatter of dishes. I walked into the living room. Derek was standing by the fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand. Mark was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. Caroline was sitting in an armchair, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on me as I entered. Derek looked up. His face shifted through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, relief, a flicker of something that might have been guilt. He set down his wineglass and crossed the room toward me. "Elena," he said, "I am glad you came." I did not smile. I did not return his embrace. I held the folder in both hands and said, "We need to talk, all of us." Margaret emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She was wearing a cream silk blouse and tailored black trousers, her hair pinned up, her face composed into an expression of controlled welcome. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes dropping to the folder in my hands. "Elena," she said, her voice was cool, measured. "I am glad you decided to join us. I was beginning to think you had forgotten what family means." I did not respond. I walked past her into the dining room and took my usual seat. I set the folder on the table in front of me, aligned with the edge of my plate. The family followed. Philip came in from the kitchen, carrying a platter of roasted chicken. He set it down at the head of the table and looked at me with a thin, careful smile. "Good to have you back, Elena." I said nothing. Margaret took her seat at the opposite head. Derek sat beside me. Mark and Caroline settled in across the table, their children conspicuously absent, probably sent upstairs away from whatever was about to happen. "Shall we say grace?" Margaret asked. "No," I said. The word landed like a stone in still water. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" I opened the folder. I pulled out the deed, the first document, and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. "I am not here for dinner," I said. "I am here to make sure we understand each other, clearly and finally." Derek leaned forward. "Elena, what are you doing?" "3 weeks ago," I said, "your mother demanded that I pay $2,500 in monthly rent for an apartment she claimed was family property. I showed you the deed. I showed you that the apartment belongs to me, purchased with my own separate funds, held in my name alone." Margaret's face tightened. "We have been through this. You made your point. There is no need for a repeat performance." "This is not a repeat performance," I said. "This is the final act." I pulled out the second document, the text message thread, printed on high-quality paper. I slid it across the table toward Derek. "You sent these messages to your mother. You discussed how to transfer the deed to my apartment before I figured out what was happening. You agreed with her that I was too independent, that I needed to be brought into the family's control. Derek's face went slack. He picked up the pages, scanning them, his eyes moving faster and faster as he read. Where did you get these? From your phone. I have had them saved for months. Margaret's voice was sharp. That is a violation of privacy. Those messages were private. Planning to commit fraud is not private. Discussing how to steal someone's property is not private. And I have more? I pulled out the third document, the mortgage statement. I held it up so everyone could see the number at the bottom. $2,500, I said. That is my monthly mortgage payment, the exact amount you demanded as rent. You did not know that when you made your demand, did you, Margaret? You thought you could extract money from me, but you did not know you were demanding the same amount I already paid to own the property outright. Margaret's eyes flickered. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in them. I pulled out the fourth document. The forged loan application, the courier receipt, the handwriting analysis. This is the part you did not expect me to find, I said. 5 weeks ago, someone filed a home equity line of credit application using my name. The collateral was my apartment. The amount requested was $120,000. The signature was forged. I placed the courier receipt on the table. The supporting documents were delivered to the bank from this address, the Harwood family home. Margaret's face drained. Not in the cliché way, not in a rush of color leaving her cheeks. It was slower, more controlled, a careful retreat of confidence behind a mask of stone. That is a serious accusation, she said. It is not an accusation, I said. It is documentation. I have the bank's security footage showing a woman matching your description opening an account in my name. I have the IP address from the home computer. I have a handwriting expert's analysis confirming the signature is not mine. I stacked the documents neatly and placed them back in the folder. You tried to steal my home. You tried to steal my identity. You conspired with my husband to transfer my property into your family's name, and you did all of this while pretending to welcome me as a daughter. Philip spoke. His voice was quiet, strained. Alina, let's not make a scene. We can discuss this privately. We are discussing it privately, I said. This is a family dinner. There is no one here but family. Caroline was staring at the documents, her face unreadable. Mark had set down his phone and was looking at his mother with an expression I could not identify. Derek was still holding the text messages. His hands were shaking. Is this true? He asked. He was looking at his mother. Did you forge her signature? Margaret did not answer. Answer me, Derek said, his voice cracked. Did you forge her signature? Margaret stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor, the same sound as the night I had walked out. But this time her composure was gone. She was breathing hard, her hands gripping the back of the chair. I did what I had to do for this family, she said. You were never going to stand up to her. You were never going to take control. Someone had to? So you committed a crime, I said. You committed multiple crimes: forgery, identity theft, attempted fraud. Those are felonies, Margaret. Each one carries a sentence of several years. She turned to me. Her eyes were wild now, the mask fully gone. You would not dare. You are family. I am not family, I said. I am the woman whose identity you stole. And I have already filed the trust that protects my apartment. I have already notified the district attorney's office. I have a sealed envelope with copies of all this evidence, delivered before I walk through this door tonight. If I do not call my attorney by midnight, that envelope will be opened, and an investigation will begin. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each beat a countdown to midnight. Philip stood up slowly. He walked to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water. He took a long drink, set the glass down, and turned to face his wife. Margaret, he said, tell me she is lying. Margaret did not answer. Tell me she is lying, Philip repeated. His voice was harder now, the passive calm stripped away. I did what I had to do, Margaret said again, but her voice was smaller, weaker. Philip looked at me. What do you want? I closed the folder. I stood up. I want you to understand that this is not negotiable. The apartment is mine. The trust is recorded. Any further attempt to claim it will be met with immediate legal action. I will not be gaslit. I will not be manipulated. I will not be treated as an outsider in my own life. I picked up the folder. I looked at Derek. You chose her, I said. Every time you chose her, and I hope the price was worth it. I walked out of the dining room. I walked through the foyer, past the arrangement of white roses, past the mirror where I caught a glimpse of my own face, calm and composed. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold night air. I did not look back. The consequences landed within 72 hours. Vivian called me on Wednesday morning. The bank has been notified of the fraud. They have frozen the account and referred the matter to their internal security team. I expect they will file a report with local law enforcement by the end of the week. What about the home equity line? Voided. The application has been rescinded and the bank has placed a fraud alert on your credit file. You will need to monitor it for the next several months, but the immediate threat is neutralized. I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, Derek called. I let it go to voicemail. Elena, I know you do not want to talk to me, but I need you to know that I did not know about the loan. I did not know she forged your signature. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I saved the voicemail. The next day, Claire sent me a link to a local news article. The headline read, Suburban Woman Charged in Identity Theft Scheme. The article named Margaret Harwood, listed the charges, and noted that the investigation was ongoing. There was a photograph of Margaret being led into the courthouse, her face hidden behind a handbag. I closed the browser. Philip called on Friday. His voice was different. There was no placation, no invitation to smooth things over. He sounded old. Elena, I am not calling to ask you to drop the charges. I am calling to tell you that I have retained a divorce attorney for Derek. I am also filing for separation from Margaret. I cannot live with what she did. I said nothing. You were right, he continued. I spent 40 years keeping the peace, and I let her destroy our family. I will not do it anymore. I did not respond. I did not forgive him. But I did not hang up. I hope you find peace, Alina, he said. You deserved better from all of us. He hung up. I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering beyond the windows, and I thought about what it meant to be believed. The court date was set for early spring. I did not attend. Vivian represented my interests, and the judge accepted the evidence without contest. Margaret was convicted of identity theft and attempted fraud. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution for the legal fees I had incurred. I did not attend the sentencing either. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Derek did not contest it. He signed the papers without argument and moved out of state. I did not ask where he went. The apartment remained mine. I still live there. I sleep in the bedroom I chose, cook in the kitchen I renovated, sit in the living room where the afternoon light falls through the windows. It is mine. It has always been mine. Claire and I have dinner together once a month. Vivian sends me a card every holiday. My grandmother's key sits on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, catching the light. I do not think about the Harwoods often, but when I do, I think about what I learned. And I want to share that with you, because if you have ever been told to shrink yourself, to apologize for protecting your boundaries, to accept mistreatment in the name of family, I need you to hear this. When someone demands something they have no claim to, they are testing your boundaries, not your generosity. They are not asking, they are probing. And how you respond determines everything. In narcissistic family systems, the golden child's ignorance is often a choice, not a misfortune. They know more than they admit, they see more than they acknowledge, and their silence is complicity. The cost of protecting your peace is sometimes the loss of relationships that never truly valued you. I lost a husband, a mother-in-law, a family, but I did not lose myself, and that was the only relationship that mattered. Ownership is not just a piece of paper. It is the power to say no. It is the power to walk away. It is the power to stand in your own home, in your own life, and know that no one can take it from you. And letting natural consequences land is the most dignified form of revenge. I did not hurt Margaret. I did not destroy her. I simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own choices. And that was more devastating than any attack I could have planned. I hope you never have to do what I did. I hope you never have to build a case against your own family, never have to sit across a table from people who claim to love you while they plan to take everything you had. But if you do, I hope you remember this. The deed is not the victory. The victory is the peace you find when you stop fighting for people who never fought for you. I am Alina Hart. I own my home. I own my life and I am at peace. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Send it to a friend, a sister, a daughter, a mother. Let them know they are not alone. Keep your boundaries strong. Guard your peace, and I will see you in the next.